While doing ethnographic fieldwork in 2019 in an Ecuadorian coastal community, I had this experience. An industrial boat that the locals called bolichero had been fishing in the miles that are devoted for artisanal fisheries, catching all the species that are in the water and putting in danger the livelihoods of the entire community. When the bolichero was seen by some people of the island, they turned on the loud sirens and everybody got out of their houses to see what was going on. A group of fishermen got into a small boat and went looking for the big one. In the chase, one of the fishermen was shot, but his partners captured the big boat and drove it into the island to have it as a memory of what had happened and with a promise of not giving it back to the industry. Based on this, I would like to ask you, what is the forecast for the conflicts between industrial and small-scale fisheries? Is it likely they are going to decrease or increase, and why? Are there zones in the world where you could say that suffer more from this type of abuses?
It's industry. Fishing is not something that's only small scale. There's a lot of large scale fisheries, a lot of fish being moved around the globe. I actually just read, I think it was yesterday or something, that a lot of the fish in the Netherlands that is brought into some of the ports in the Netherlands actually gets shipped back to West Africa to be sold there, even though it's caught nearby West Africa. So these are the kinds of things that amaze me also on a daily basis, basically. And I don't know enough about it, but overall you can definitely say that it's been industrialized. It's a large scale industry, just like in a lot of cases, agriculture in general is. So I think in a large part we can talk about global north, global south dimensions here, not just geographically, obviously, but different areas of the world with different levels of power in the industry, I guess. And of course, different levels of voice in that regard as well. So that's the overall picture, I would say. And where it's going, I don't know, obviously. I can tell you where I hope it would be going, that we can have a bit more balance and we can understand that these large-scale fisheries are not sustainable. And hopefully the industry realizes that themselves, that they're basically killing their own future. But in that regard, of course, I'm not sure to what extent it will be possible to immediately try and grant more rights to local communities. I would hope that, but it's going to take quite a bit more effort, I think, to get there.
What have other communities done to successfully tackle these problems? Are the communities the only ones called to solve these problems? In a broader context of governance, who are or can be partners to reach ocean justice?
So in terms of a couple of examples, they're not from fishing, but there's some examples where you see that communities have played a role in this, often also together with NGOs, for instance. Take one example. A colleague of mine, Tim Boekhout van Solingen, did research in the Amazon rainforest about deforestation, and he saw indigenous communities being affected by this, whether because of agricultural land that the forest was cut or other reasons. And a main issue was the land rights. A lot of these communities don't know how to deal with the issue of land rights. They didn't have a conception of land rights, but they started to realize, judicially, it's something they need to deal with. So what he did is actually he gave those communities GPS cameras. And for them to be able to take pictures with a GPS location in it, made it actually possible to prove in court, this is my land and somebody is encroaching on it. So this is a small scale example, but I think it's a very powerful one and honestly a very simple one too, that is having effect for these local communities. I mean, they're still facing the bigger challenge, they're still facing deforestation and threats, but in this way they have a resource they can use to their benefit in court. And this also nicely illustrates, who's necessary to involve in this. I talked about these NGOs, well, in this case also a researcher, but I think voice of NGOs, voice of communities, together with, of course, governments. I think there's still an important role for governments across the world to regulate this. But on a large scale today, the fishing industry, there might be regulations, but the extent to which they're implemented is another thing. I mean, there's not many that actually go out at sea and check fishing vessels or check when the fish arrives in the harbor, whether whatever they caught is what they're allowed to catch, both in terms of quantity and the types of fish. Whether they've actually been in somebody else's waters, as in the example that you've given. The implementation of that is very problematic, and research has also shown this. It's true for any type of environmental issues, but I think it's definitely true for fishing. There's increasing research on this, but industrial scale fishing, illegal fishing, informal fishing. There's so many levels of things that that are going outside of legal boundaries. And of course, in this, to a certain extent, there's also an industry involved. There's corporations involved. So I think if you want to come to a sustainable solution, it might have to be about involving all of those stakeholders. But of course, it will have to be about involving them also with equal say and equal rights. And I think that today is not the case.
Other issues I have read and heard of in informal interviews, newspapers, and social media reports are related to the presence of robberies and drug trafficking on water in other areas of the Ecuadorian coast. Some of these crimes are not reported, maybe because the locals are afraid and to blow the whistle is not exactly an option when criminals might easily get out of jail. As an expert, I would like to ask you how to deal with robberies, piracy, and drug trafficking when fishermen are afraid of reporting these crimes in a context of fragile justice and high demand of drugs at the international level?
So you're talking, of course, about illegal activities, a variety of them, piracy and drug trafficking and other things that might happen. It's part of a very complex context, an international context. There's global flows at play here. There's global inequalities that play a role in this. I think in all of these cases, the origin of a lot of these problems lie also within those economic troubles, maybe within ecological injustice that is happening. People seeing their livelihoods goes to waste. They might actually, be forced into or choose to engage in illegal practices to make sure that they can sustain a livelihood for their family or have some sort of income. We see this also here in the Netherlands. I mean, it's the other side of the coin for the drug trafficking. It's where it ends up. In Ecuador, of course, you're part of the origin, but here, this is where it comes in. It gets in transit to other places in Europe. And we see also small fishing communities have challenges with this. They might be asked to, can I use your fishing boat? Can you help me out to go onto the water to pick something up? They might choose not to say it when they see somebody else picking up something in the water. And I mean, for all sorts of reasons. Even here, we might have a good justice system, but there might still be fear of retaliation. It might happen. They might be worried that their name is going to be in the police report. So even in a context where there is a justice system, even that is challenging. But of course, on the other end, in Ecuador, it's probably even more challenging. And I think it's, part of the solution, we can't come to it today, obviously, is about trying to give a voice, trying to also understand the dynamics that lead to their involvement in this. Because if you can understand these, then you can try to tackle them. And I know, for instance, in the Netherlands, for some of these communities, they're involving young people. People going through school that might end up becoming fishermen themselves or fisherwomen themselves. Try to involve them, teach them about the dynamics, teach them about sustainability, but also teach them, what they can do if they get involved, raise the issue and say, this is not okay. We need to do something about this. I think starting from the basics, people that are at this, still very young, they can still have an impression. They can be imprinted with good ideas and hopefully good solutions for the future. So I think that's necessary to be able to solve these issues. And I mean, for piracy, it's similar. We've seen this in Somalia, for instance, that some elements there have been related to basically just, industrial scale fishing, threatening local communities who then get involved in piracy. So the issue is then you first need to tackle the fact that they don't have a livelihood anymore before you can do away with the piracy.
And to close our interview, would you reflect with us about this question? Is it fiction to believe that local communities and their partners in the reach of ocean justice can face and solve these type of problems?
I think it's very important to believe that. I think it's a big challenge. But I don't think it's fiction. I think we've seen in some cases that local communities can, in whatever circumstances it be, raise a voice and gain some power in going against industrialized practices and trying to find a way back. There's some examples of dams that have now been destroyed basically and restored rivers and also communities' livelihoods relating to those rivers. So there's some examples out there. So I think they're a good example to show that it's possible.